So if you watched my last video, you would have seen the old Land Rover from the father-in-law that we have. And for the past few years, I have been accumulating a heap of parts and tools for a little bit of sort of freshen up for the axle. And all was going pretty swell. It's all going pretty good, but now I've kind of been forced to have to do it now. And, well, this is why. So a couple of weeks ago, I was driving on my merry way to the tip and I had a blowout. And it happened on this side, on the back. Which is why I now have no spare. But you're probably thinking you've got one on the back. Well, that needs replacing too. So now, it pretty much leaves me with, well, I have to do the axle and all the bearings and all the seals to go with it. And I have to do the brakes because, believe it or not, I did fill this right up to the brim to prove it, and well, she's looking pretty low. And to add salt to the wound, I started it the other day and I could smell petrol, and it was dripping from this rubber hose straight onto the manifold. So I guess I have no choice now. So I've accumulated all the front brakes set up, and my springs, bolts, nuts, pads are in there. And in the series Land Rovers, you have two brake cylinders, top and the bottom. That's for the front. So I've got that. I've also got the nut tool also, so I can get the nuts out of the axle. You'll see exactly what I mean. Two new OEM oil seals for both front and rear diff. Two wheel bearing kits for the rear. I don't know if I'll get to the rear in this video, but I have them ready to go. This is all for the swivel hub kit. I've got the Ryco bushing here, assortment of O-rings and, well, washers, a lock washer for each side, hub oil seal for each side, swivel bearing, two of those, new swivel seal, two of those, two new Ryco top pins, a heap of Land Rover locking tabs. These, from what I've heard, are pretty garbage, and an assortment, combination of paper seals and gaskets. And no, I'm not going fishing, but you'll see what this is for. It's got a purpose. A little bit agricultural, but it'll work.
Not too sure what happened here, but the driver's side is full of grease. But then the passenger side has nothing. Drivers, passenger. So I need to look into that.
Right, well, I knew this was already going to be a big job, and these bolts here, I can't get any further because all the thread is rusted. I can't replace this seal until I can get the actual ball off the diff. Can you see all of this? All of that, I don't know how well the GoPro's picking it up. That is all sand. Now in all the little nooks and crannies, it's just sand. It's pretty clear on the top of this. There, all the sand. I gotta do some research, find out why there was all this grease in one of them and none in the other.
So I used some CRC, let it sit overnight, and as you can see, they were coming out quite easily after that. Got this swivel ball off, and as you can see, there's quite a fair bit of sand on top of the ball there. Just taking the plate off for the rear seal, leaving that there so I don't lose it. This is the inside roller bearing that spins on the bearing on the half shaft as well. The rubber seal in there still looks okay, but now I'm going to attach the steering arms to the hubs, and the Land Rover manuals states to use retaining compound on the flat surface. I did realise that once I put this in, I'd actually forgotten an O-ring, so I will need to take that out so I can fit the O-ring. But as I was undoing the studs, due to the rust, I ended up unscrewing a whole stud with the nut still on it. I will probably most likely replace those in the future, but for now, just to get it back on the road, I'll put up with what I've got. Once it's torqued down, it shouldn't make a difference, but I will replace those and replace the nuts for new ones. Just going to use my finger here just to spread it so it's even coverage right around. Doesn't need to be much. I think I've probably gone a little overboard, but it'll be okay. Problem for future me in the next day when I take it off to fit the O-ring. Those studs do make this a bit of a tight fit. Forced to sort of wiggle it on. Fit some of the new shiny locking tabs for the nuts. I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite just on this stud here, just because it came out of the whole housing. I'm going to screw him in. Hopes that that'll do part of the job. Again, future problem for future me when I go to replace all these studs.
Fuck me. Same over. Have the same on today. This way, the new Rolco bush. basically, that's going to go into there, like so. And if you're like me and you don't have a hard hammer, well, a proper hammer, you can use the old bush just to sit on top while you drive the new one in. Yep, that's the last way we're working cars, mate.
Yeah, I heard this I swear tonight again. I was had 2 swims again.
Pretty sick of this thing falling over.
Yeah. I'm not in. What? Please let that work! Oh, yes. Did it go out? Yes.
So now fitting the swivel hub and the Rollco bearing to the bottom pin. Land Rover state this is meant to be a press fit, but there is some play with the bearing. I get why Land Rover did this, make disassembly a bit easier, but in this manual it states to use retaining compound. Actually, it doesn't state anything really, but I put a little bit of retaining compound on it. I guess that's going to be a problem for future me in another decade's time if I ever need to pull it out, but you can see it's clearly not a press fit. So here I have the shims to go on the underneath the top Rollco pin. These shims come in different sizes. They're all different thickness to adjust your preload on the bearing. Obviously you release, take one out to tighten the pressure, put more in to sort of loosen the pressure. These ones are a little bit ratty. I did order some new ones. By the time they arrived I had everything back together, so I didn't bother replacing them. I'll worry about that in a future scenario if I go to do any work on the axle again.
This is where this comes in. So I need 8,000 pound or 8 pound preload on the top bearings, the bottom bearing. That's to set the preload up here. If it gets any different, I need to pull out the shims and change them out. So I've run into an issue. The preload on this swivel hub is sitting at about 12 pound. The other one on the passenger side is sitting at 8 pound. Now that's got to do with your shims that go underneath this top Rolco pin, and that sets your preload on your bottom bearing. Now I've read a couple of things online. Online says it to be 8 to 10. In the book it says 12 pound. This is 13 pound at the moment. So if I'm going off the book, this is right. If I'm going off online, then that side's right. I think what I'm gonna do, I think I'm gonna run it as it is, and obviously keep an eye on it. Worst case scenario, what I will probably have to do is once the new pins arrive, I will take the wheel off, get to these top bolts for your top Rolco pin, and then I'll pull it off and add and subtract shims until I can bring it down a couple of pound. I think that might be probably the best option. I think I'm gonna do that. You can judge me all you want if you're a Land Rover person, but I think that that's not gonna hurt. But I guess time will tell. So yeah. So what I'm doing now is just whacking some grease in. I did put grease in here. I'm guessing that's the wrong spot. So what I'm gonna do, just gonna run it a bit on the inside of the edge, right around it. Now another little tip that I have been told to do is just use a little bit of anti-seize, not a lot. And there needs to be a bit of a whiff of anti-seize just on the outside edge. This will stop it from corroding and ultimately giving it the best chance to seal on that backing plate. Will also prevent it rusting in there over time. This looks like it might be stainless. I don't know how that works, but I don't know. What do I know? Not a lot. I'm just an idiot on YouTube making wannabe videos. It's pretty much all it is. It's all I am. But if you guys get a kick out of it, then, well, I guess I've kind of succeeded at something, haven't I? Okay, so I'm going to bring the seal up into there. Backing plate. And the seal. Put him there. Bring this backing plate. Put him there.
Now these new brake cylinders, they're a Brit part brake cylinder, and they're garbage. The fitment in these backing plates was pretty pathetic. I did have to kind of hack the other back plate to get one of the cylinders to actually sit in there properly. The machining work on these was pretty poor. For the sake of changing them out, I very nearly put the old ones back in, but for the sake of new ones I decided to persist. These plates are pretty rusted, and the brake adjusters as well are very rusted as well. Eventually one day I would like to replace these, but for the meantime I ran with what I had. It's a common thing with Land Rover with Brit part and aftermarket third party companies that make parts for these cars, is that a lot of them are cheaply made and not quite as good as brand new and, well, stock. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all you've really got to choose from, unless you hunt around for new old stock, but then you could be hunting for who knows how long. Just making sure that all the cylinders are on the same way you take them off. That way then you have no confusion about which ones go on and which way they go on. Each cylinder is in a different orientation, so you've got to make sure that you pick up the right ones, otherwise it's not going to work how it should. I could have brought brand new adjusters for this video, but the problem with brand new adjusters is that they are all very cheaply made. Instead of being a welded connection like these ones are, they are a bolt type sort of connection on either side. So you've got the nut or the bolt on one end, and then it screws in on the other end inside it. It's very cheaply made, very poor cut thread, and I haven't watched a single video of anybody who hasn't had a complaint with them. So I decided not to. These adjusters still work. They are just a little bit ratty, greased up, oiled up, grimed up, and rusty, but they still work.
I'm going to insert this now through that roller bearing in there, through the rubber seal. The joys of working outside, it's starting to sprinkle. So I really want to try and get this all together now. Now, it is these locking tabs that are garbage. These are rusted, obviously, very old. The kit didn't come with new ones, even the brake kit, so I'm going to use these again, but I'm going to put a whiff of some Loctite just to hold them in there, give them the maximum chance in case these do perish and break in the meantime.
So I don't actually know where the footage went of me fitting the stub axle, but as you can see here, I have a dial indicator attached to the first nut. The manual states to have about 4 thousandths of play in the bearings. I achieved this, and it is basically hand tight, finger tight. It's not very tight, that first one at all. By the time the lock washer and the locking nut goes on, then there's little to no play in it. There's about 1/1000th to 2/1000ths of an inch, which is bugger all. But according to the Land Rover manual, that is more than enough and pretty well bang on. And yes, I know I'm using a screwdriver to knock this washer on, because it needs to be knocked down, and a screwdriver is probably not the smartest choice. You can easily chip off little burrs and they can work their way into the bearing, but I'm doing this very carefully. On goes the drum, and gently knocking it on just to get it seated properly onto the stub axle. I was quite surprised with the aftermarket screws that we got to secure the drum, as it's a very common thing with aftermarket parts that the actual screw doesn't sit flat on the face of the drum, therefore not sitting face like flat to the wheel, which can be a safety concern, but these ones fit perfectly flush and into the recess on the drum.
So I just went down the street, picked up my tyres that I'd ordered a couple of weeks ago. They're a Toyo Open Country Mud Terrain 255/85/16. Nice aggressive little pattern, chunky one. Now I've got 4 of those, so I'll get to whacking them in.
Now to sort out my fuel hose from the fuel filter. I went out, brought some 8mm hose, cut that down. Bit of a shame I could only buy a metre of it, but at least I've got some spare. Pulled out the new filter that I've had sitting on the shelf in the shed, ready to go. And I whacked that in, made sure it was nice and secure, and ran her up, made sure that there was no petrol leaking out at all. Standard on these 202s is a hard line all the way from the mechanical pump to the carburetor, the carby. But someone in their wisdom, somewhere along this vehicle's years, has chopped that to add a secondary filter. Now the mechanical pump already has a filter, it's got a fuel bowl, and that's meant to filter out any contaminants in the fuel. But someone's put in another one. Potentially I could upgrade this line to an AN braided line for longevity, but for the time being this is going to work just fine. So the next job is to bleed the brakes of any air. Since I've replaced the front cylinders, I want to make sure that the rear doesn't have any air in it either. I've used a shifter for these bleed nipples on the back and they are very rusted. I will do the brakes on the rear at a later date. I'm not going to do it right now as everything for the front has set us back plus the tyres. So I will save to do the back and do the rear. But for now, the way that I had to do this was use a shifter with a 10mm socket on the end just to crack it and get a little bit of fluid coming out. This seemed to work. All I basically did was just crack it off a bit until I could see some fluid coming out, put my finger on it, then grab my little makeshift hose, stick that on the end, which was going into a bottle full of brake fluid. And the theory behind this is that when you press the brake pedal, you're going to push out any of the old brake oil out, and if it's going to suck anything in, it's going to suck up some of your new oil that you've already got in there. And when I press the pedal, you can see it pushing the old fluid out into the bottle. You can see the air bubbles. Now you may remember when I pulled out the half shafts in the axle, they were covered in grease. That is a result of somebody who didn't know what they were doing when they put it back together previously. This little drain or fill plug here is for gear oil. Now in the manual it states to fill this until it starts coming out and then put the cap back in. So that shaft should be swimming in oil, not grease. I had a little bit of difficulty with this one just because of the way that the steering was, but it doesn't take a lot of fluid, but this is how it should have been done, not how the last peanut did it. And with that, that's it. It's all back together. The sense of achievement when finishing a project like this, you've had it apart and you've replaced everything, you'll be able to drive it down the road and it'd be better than what it was. It's a huge sense of achievement for me and anybody doing this sort of thing to their cars. I could own a new flash car, but I wouldn't get the enjoyment out of it as I do something like this with a bit of character. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to hit that like if you enjoyed it. If you're new here, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.